Hey everyone, this is Victor here with Dapper Dash, and today I want to show you how you can use a parameter to dynamically change your data sources, or how you can use it to pull in a different population from your data set. Now, why is it important for you to know how to do this, or why should it even matter? So I'm going to use both Excel and SQL to show you how you can accomplish this, and also show you why it might be useful to understand how to do this. I think the best way to understand the need for something like this is to dive right into an example. So let's go do that. So let's say I am the manager, actually I'm the owner of a chain of different stores. Originally I started with just one store, but now I have 14 other stores. And each one of these stores has their own manager. And what I've asked them to do is each manager every week sends me a file, and it's the same format where they send me their store number plus the item number of the items that they were selling, right? So we sell 5 different items at this clothing store, and then they send me how many were sold. So how can I use the same dashboard and the same template, but just point it to a different store so that I can see how my different stores are doing? And that's what I'm going to show you how to do with a simple parameter. How can we use that parameter to navigate across our different Excel workbooks and see how each different store is doing without actually having to load each of these into Power BI? Okay, so here we are in our blank workbook. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by importing just one of our stores. So you would normally do this by going to Excel. Right, here we are, our 15 different stores. We're going to start by importing just store 1. And this all probably looks familiar. We're going to go ahead and click weekly sales, which is our worksheet. Right, so if we go to our different stores, remember we want to be able to create a dashboard that we can show for each of the stores without having to import each of these into Power BI, and without having to create some sort of process that combines these into one Excel workbook. Although that would be ideal, but it's not necessary, and that's what being able to use a parameter to dynamically change the data source, that's what it allows you to do. So we're going to go ahead and import store 1. You can see this is our data. Here's our store ID, and we're going to go transform. So now, in order to do the dynamic change, we're going to be working within Power Query. But the first thing we're going to do before we do that is let's just hit close and apply and load the data. And in order to make sure that this worked, what we're going to do is we are going to grab just this card here, and we're going to go grab our store ID and make sure that this is store 1. Maybe I'm going to put that here or something. Okay, here's store 1. So that when we start to dynamically change stores, we see how the changes are being made. Okay, so there's store 1. Now we're going to go back, and this is where we're going to create our parameter to change between the different stores. Okay, and the first thing you're going to notice is each of my files that my store managers provides, it's named exactly the same, except for the last 2 characters are the store number. Right, so store 08, store 14, store 03. And that's going to be used, that's actually allows us to simply create this parameter. We don't have to worry about, different Excel workbooks being named differently. This simplifies the process. So we're going to go back to our data source, our weekly sales. And within Power Query, you're able to go to this advanced editor. And this actually lists out all the steps that had to be taken to do the simple, import from Excel. This is actually everything that goes on behind the scenes, right? It goes and it finds the data source using this path. It then grabs the worksheet, weekly sales. It uses the first row as headers, and then we determine our data type. Okay. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to create our parameter. because we want to be able to load a different store depending on our parameter. Remember, we don't want to load each store into Power BI and do that 15 times. So you're going to right click and hit new parameter. And this is going to be our store parameter, or whatever it's called on your side. Maybe it's your client ID or person ID. And for me, remember, I changed this to text. And I could start typing in any value, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to create a list of values. And it's going to be a little bit tedious, but it's not going to take very long. And this is just to show you something that you can do, an additional step. So I'm going to type in each of my 15 stores. So store 5, store 6, 7, and so on. Okay. And just for simplicity, our current value is going to be store 1. And we're going to go ahead and hit OK. So now we see we have our store parameter, current value of 1. But now we got to be able to link this parameter and have it used to dynamically determine which Excel worksheet we're working with. Right? So that's what we're going to do. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create a string that's a combination of our path plus our Excel file, but our parameter is going to change depending on what we set it to. If we set it to store 05, it's going to go to store 5, store 15, store 11. So go back to weekly sales, hit advanced editor. So this is what we're going to change here. And our parameter we're going to use to change this variable right there so that we can point it to a different store. And in order to do that, I put a function in the description, but it's a Power Query function, an M function. It's called Text.Combine. And what Text.Combine does is just allows you to concatenate a list of strings. So open parentheses. So Text.Combine concatenates a list of text values into one text value. And because this is a list, you do have to open it with curly brackets as well, so that we can define each item in our list, and those are going to be separated by a comma. So we're going to go here where we need to split this string. We're going to split it by hitting the double quotes, right? This is our first string, and then we're going to hit comma to go into our next string. And this is where our parameter, our number, is going to come in handy. So we're going to put in our store parameter, and it should be right there, followed by a comma to go into our next text. And then all we need is to close the parentheses here, or to close the double quote, sorry. And then we're going to close our list of strings with the curly brackets, and then we're going to close our Text.Combine with a closed parentheses. So there you have it, Text.Combine. We're going to concatenate this file path plus our store number and then the Excel extension. And that's all. That's all you need to do to dynamically change your data source. And you're going to go ahead and hit done. So remember, we brought in store ID 1, but now we can set our parameter to maybe store 12. And if we go back to our data source, it's now pointed to store 12. And we can verify that by opening up our Excel worksheet. And you'll notice that store 12 has, for item 1, 126 items sold. For item 4, we have 295, right? 181. So it looks like that worked. And so now this parameter allows us to choose which Excel file we want to open. And why is that going to matter? Because once we hit close and apply, once we build our dashboard template, we're now able to change the data source. Maybe I have a workspace for each of my different stores, and I need to publish the report of weekly sales to my manager at store 7. So instead of having to build a separate dashboard for them or combine my Excel workbooks, all I got to do is point my parameter to store 7, hit OK, refresh my data source, and now I'm on store 7. And let me show you what the final output of something like this would look like, and then we'll jump into SQL. So let me show you what my finished dashboard looks like for this one. And here we are. So this is our final dashboard, store 1. Here we have our manager, Bob, and we have our weekly top seller item, which is the purse, also highlighted in pink. You can see the purse, the revenue for weekly sales on the purse was $16,000, which was about 33% of our total revenue for the week. And we published this out to our workspace, but now we need to publish, the report for store 5. So we just change our parameters store 5, refresh our data source so it points it to our new Excel worksheet for store 5. And now store 5, the manager is Ray, also a weekly top seller of the purse. Let's see if we can find one that has a different weekly top seller. Just so you know that this is working, let's go to store 13. We're going to hit OK. Same thing. Apply our changes. It's going to point our model to the new store. In this case, store 13. Our manager is Amy. Our weekly top seller is actually the shoes. 13,000 in sales, 36% of the revenue for store 13's weekly sales. And that's how you use a parameter if you want to point it to a different data source, in this case, a different Excel worksheet. And remember, this only works, or at least this works pretty simple for us, because all of our data files are named exactly the same with the exception of the number, right? That's where our store parameter is pointing to. Which Excel sheet do we want to open? And this also works because each of our files contains the same columns. Because if I build a graph like this table, I'm pointing this table to these different columns. If one of my files has a different column name, maybe instead of revenue or instead of item name, it simply just says name, well, it's going to break this link, right? Because my data source is pointing to a column called item name, but now it's pointed to something called name. It's probably going to break this. So that's one thing that you do want to keep in mind, is make sure that each of your files, that the columns are the same name, right? They may have different values, but as you can see here, store ID, item, quantity sold. So as long as my columns are the same, it shouldn't break any of my visual representation. So that's how we do it in the case of a lot of Excel worksheets. So let me show you how you would do it in SQL, or how this could apply to a relational database. So let's jump into that one. Okay, so here we are in SQL. And so let's say instead of my data source coming from Excel, now it's coming from a SQL table. In this case, I created a view. And the reason why I created a view is because I want to leverage some of the query folding capabilities of Power BI. So I took my query that would normally build the exact same data that we saw in Excel, but I'm using it now to create a view. So I want to leverage this data set in Power BI. So first, let's get our data loaded, and then I'll show you how we can leverage the parameter in something like SQL as well. So we're going to go to new source. In my particular case, I'm going to click SQL Server. And I got to do the server and the database name. So we're using my server plus my database. We're going to go ahead and click import. That's fine. Now we're not going to do the SQL statement because this would be leveraging a native query. And we don't want to use a native query because you tend to lose some of the capabilities of the query folding. You can still get around it, but for right now, let me just show you how to work with it in a simple view. At the very end, I'll show you maybe if you have a really complex query, how you can do it if you insert a SQL statement into here. But for now, we're just going to do a simple, go into our demo database, and we're going to make sure that we grab this data from our view, our weekly sales view. So there's our data. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And this might be familiar if you work using relational databases, maybe something like Microsoft SQL Server. Remember, we want to be able to leverage our parameter to filter based on the store. We saw why that was useful with Excel sheets, because with the Excel sheets, we don't want to import each of those sheets, right? We don't want to import each of these into Power BI one at a time. That's too time consuming. So the parameter was a simple fix. But why would you need the parameter if all your data is in one place already, right? We have our different stores right here, stores 1 through 15. Why do you need a parameter? Well, this example is simple because we only have 75 rows. But let's say you're a big corporation and you have millions and maybe even billions of rows. You have different clients that you need to provide a dashboard to. And maybe you do some of this already at your own company where you import millions of these rows and you're having to refresh your data every month. And all you do is you sit here and you watch it spin for about 30 minutes, an hour, 40 minutes, however long it takes to load, 40 million, 50 million rows. And all you're really doing is you're just building one dashboard for maybe a few clients and you're publishing it out to an app or to a workspace. Well, doing something like this parameter could actually save you literally maybe hours of time loading your data. Because instead of loading each employer or each client or each person or whoever it may be or each store, instead of loading the millions and millions of rows for each one every single week or every single month, having to refresh it and then sit here for an hour while it loads, all you're doing is just having to load one at a time. You just load one. If this week I need to push out the data for client 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead of having to load the data for every client, I just want to load the data for client 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I still want to preserve my template. So this is where the parameter comes in handy. So remember the advanced editor? We're able to view, same thing. These are the steps that Power BI has taken to go grab data from our data source and from our view. So now what we're going to do, and if you're one of those people that are big into query folding, there. Our native query is active. We're leveraging query folding. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a filter on our store ID so that we can leverage our parameter. But this store right here this is actually a number. This isn't, remember how our Excel sheets are 0, 1, 0, 2. This is actually just 1 through 15. So we're going to have to change this a little bit. But let's go ahead and set a filter here. Let's filter. So we're going to click on this drop down arrow and we're going to do a text filter where this equals, let's just go to store 10. Okay, we're going to hit OK. Okay, now we've filtered our data down to store 10. If you're concerned about query folding, we're still leveraging query folding, right? This is pushing this query back to my SQL source and it's filtering based on store 10. So we're able to use our parameter to still do query folding. So now let's implement our parameter. Okay, but remember, we do have to kind of change this a little bit because we're no longer using 0, 1. Now we're just using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the rest of the numbers. We're going to hit OK. Go back to our SQL source, hit Advanced Editor, and once you're in the Advanced Editor, you'll notice that, remember, we hit filter based on, we manually typed this in to filter. So instead of manually, now we're going to actually point this to our store parameter so it can be dynamic. Because all we're looking for is just a value here. So all we're going to do is just put our store parameter right there. And now our store ID is going to filter down to store parameter. We're going to hit done. And we're no longer on store 10 because our parameter is actually set to 15. So now we can change it to store 7. If we go look, we've now filtered down to store 7. For those of you who are more concerned with the query folding side, we're still leveraging query folding. This is pretty good. Okay, this is awesome. So now you can see how we're dynamically changing the SQL in the background. Now, maybe one more thing is if you're one of those people who you like to work with unique queries, you're also able to do the same thing. Maybe you have a really complex query and that's what you're using for your data source. It's no worries. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here and this right here. And let me show you how you can do the same thing. So if you're one of the users who inserts your unique query into this SQL statement, you hit OK. Right, there's our entire table. But remember, we're trying to change this to whatever our parameter is. Go ahead and hit Advanced Editor. And you can see that it drops the query right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete that because it looks a little sloppy. And I'm going to insert my query right there. So there's my source, right? There's my query. And now I can create a where statement, where s.storeID equals, and remember this is where we want our parameter to be. I'm just going to type parameter for now. And the same way that we did it with the Excel sheets, remember our Text.Combine function, we can do the same thing here. So in our query, we're going to do Text.Combine. Remember, we open parentheses and we open brackets, and this takes a list. So we're going to go all the way down to here. We're going to close double quotes there so that we can go into our next string, hit a comma. We're going to concatenate all of this with our parameter. So all we got to do is close our curly brackets and close our Text.Combine function. And you should be good to hit done. Oh, we got to change this because this is not just called parameter. Remember, this is store parameter. So store parameter. Hit done. We're going to rerun this. And there we go. Store 11. Let's go change the parameter again to maybe store 3. Go back to weekly sales. Because this is a native query, it has to refresh it. But now we're back to store 3. Okay? So that's how you can dynamically change your data source or dynamically change your queries, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So Text.Combine allows you to concatenate strings and Power Query, which is a really powerful source to be able to change parameters, because maybe you have a parameter that points to a different database, right? Maybe this is or a different server parameter. Maybe you have a database parameter, database param, right? And if each of those had a parameter here, you can point your source to maybe a UAT server and whatever database may be in that UAT environment, or a test environment, or production server. So you can really quickly see how powerful this can really be, using parameters to alter your data sources. So I've showed you how to do that in Excel. I've showed you how to do that in SQL. Hopefully, if this helps you, great. This isn't something that I think a lot of you are going to run into, that you're not really going to need to do this. But in the off chance that you do have to do this, where maybe you have different data sets all in different Excel sheets, or you have really, really large tables in SQL and you're really just trying to narrow it down to a specific employer or a specific client, or you're trying to switch between servers or databases. Hopefully you've seen how creating parameters can be really helpful in changing your data sources. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, once again, please help out the channel, hit like and subscribe, and check out any of the other videos that I have. And thank you for watching.